Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're located. My name is Colleen Deere. I am the Executive Director at ACP. First off, thank you to Jordana and everybody for having me today. I'm really excited to talk about one of my favorite subjects, the value of mentorship. So I think this is very timely, especially given Veterans Day coming up next week. And then I'm sure everybody had the date of October 27th marked on their calendar, which was, I'm sure no one's going to guess, but it was actually National Mentoring Day. So at ACP, we had some nice conversations internally about it and did some social media posts. But so kind of a timely topic. So just to introduce myself briefly, so first, let me tell you what ACP is if you haven't heard of us before, just because while this is, of course, not a sales pitch for ACP, I think it's important to kind of set some context into, what makes me personally an expert on mentorship. I wish I could say it's because I always took advantage of mentorship throughout my career or, that it was something that was valuable to me in the early days of my career, but to be brutally honest, no. It's only now that I've been at ACP for 12 years that I've clearly seen the value of mentorship. ACP as a nonprofit has helped 21,000 veterans make a successful transition from the armed services to the civilian workforce. We've also helped 700 active duty spouses. It's a really powerful tool, but it's because of my work at ACP that I feel qualified to give a discussion on the value of mentorship. So ACP is a national nonprofit. We're based in New York City. We connect transitioning military and active duty spouses with corporate leaders for one-on-one year-long mentorships that are supported by our staff of about 50 in our office in New York City. Myself personally, I am not a military veteran. However, I am a military veteran spouse. My husband served on active duty in the Army for about 4.5 years. He transitioned out in 2010, and that is actually how I found ACP. Just literally went on Google, typed in resources for transitioning veterans, because the big challenge for him was, how does he figure out what he wants to do next and what's out there, who to talk to about these things. And so in my head, I, kept thinking there's got to be some kind of a resource out there to help people in this situation. And that's how I found ACP. And ACP was hiring for an operations associate, basically meaning they needed somebody to come in and manage and facilitate mentorship pairs between veterans and corporate executives. And so it seemed like a dream job. And here I am almost 12 years later. So I'm the executive director now at ACP. So with that backdrop, just a little bit about me and ACP. Let me go to the next slide here just so you can have a little bit of a sense of kind of what we're going to cover today in this talk. And I'd love, I know it's the end of the day. It's 5 o'clock here on the East Coast. So hopefully everybody has, their third, fourth cup of coffee with them, and we can make this somewhat interactive. I'd love for you to feel free to pop in some questions in the Q&A here. I'm certainly going to leave time at the end of the presentation to make sure that I can cover any questions that are asked. So you can either feel free to ask it later, but definitely you can also post it in the feed so that way we can kind of have a nice list to go through later. So mentorship is just so important. I really can't stress that enough. Everyone has something to learn from somebody else, no matter who that someone else is. So, it can really be life-changing. With the 21,000 vets who've gone through ACP, every single one of those veterans has told us that the program has made a significant impact on their transition from the armed services to the corporate workforce. And it's because their mentors were able to provide advice, open doors for them. It's a fact that people that have strong networks and that they have good mentors, those types of people typically have higher pay, they're more satisfied in their careers, they land more promotions. So it's kind of a no-brainer. So the good news, I guess, for me about this presentation being called the value of mentorship is that I probably don't need to sell you too hard, because I don't know that there's going to be a heck of a lot of people out there who are, coming to this presentation who don't think mentorship is important in some way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. And obviously, taking the time to attend a Veteran Employment and Transition Summit means you're taking active steps toward developing your career. So that's super important. So you're already, that's half the battle right there. So thanks for being here and thanks for taking your career seriously. So we'll just kind of talk through some basics of mentorship. I want to kind of cover what I call the 5 W's. I used to be a journalist, so I always like to think about the who, what, when, where, and why of things. So we'll talk about that, why people should have mentorships, maybe some of the myths and misconceptions about mentorship, how you can be a good mentee. At ACP, we call our mentees proteges, but same thing. And then I'll just tell you very quickly about how ACP could potentially help you if you're interested after hearing this. Okay, how do I get my own mentor? ACP is definitely standing by ready to assist in connecting you to a mentor. And then we'll just talk a little bit at the end about just some advice that I've received from mentors over my career that I think is important to share. And then if you feel so inclined and you're thinking about paying it forward and you might want to be a mentor, we can talk a little bit about, why that's important as well. So let me switch over here to my next slide. So the graphic here I just thought was sort of timely. As I mentioned on National Mentoring Day, we asked our staff, what does mentorship mean to you personally, and also just from the different veterans and spouses that you've worked with at ACP, what have they said they've found valuable about mentorship, and what does their mentor mean to them? And so, I think what's really neat here is there's so many different words, mentor as a sounding board, a teacher, a coach, somebody to help with interviewing, to help with resumes, to help with motivation, confidence, feedback, getting a competitive edge. So as you can see, mentorship is, of course, going to mean something different to everybody, but that's exactly why it's valuable, is it's not just one answer to one question. It's somebody that you can have really in your corner throughout your career. And most people have more than one mentor. It's not the type of thing where you have one mentor for life. I mean, maybe you are lucky enough that you can find that. But I think that's rare. I think most people probably have multiple mentors, some maybe deeper relationships than others, but that's kind of the beauty of it, is that it's somewhat free form and it's really up to you. So kind of thinking, back to my framework of the 5 W's. So, who can be considered a mentor? So really anybody, at various points in my life, I would say I've had bosses who have been mentors, teachers in college or grad school. Even my dad sometimes will give me some, career advice that I would consider mentorship. But I think it can also be more subtle than that. There's plenty of people that I follow on LinkedIn that, not to sound creepy, but they don't know that I consider them a mentor. But to me, they are a mentor if they're kind of a thought leader in the space and they're giving me career advice that I can then act on. So, I think the point here is that all over our lives, there's going to be examples of mentorship, whether the person knows it or not, and whether it's formal or informal. So, I told you a little bit about ACP. So that's obviously a formal mentoring program where you're paired up, you have somebody that you're working with throughout the year. ACP staff is checking in on you, making sure it's going well. So that's, of course, more formal in that you're paired with one specific person. But there's so much informal mentorship that's out there as well. It could be maybe you're working at a company and they have a veterans ERG. And so you get advice from time to time. Maybe you go out for a cup of coffee with somebody who's a step ahead of you career-wise. That's mentorship too, even if somebody's not checking in on you to see how it's going. So the who, I think, mentors are out there. It's kind of up to you to find them and to listen to them. One question that I get asked all the time is, if you're a veteran or if you're a military spouse, does your mentor need to be a fellow veteran or a fellow military spouse? And I would advise, absolutely not. Yes, of course, have some veteran mentors if you want them, and you probably should have some in your corner. But I also think it's really important to have the other side of the table covered, to get the civilian perspective. So that way, if you're, prepping for interviews, your mentor can say to you, hey, I have no idea what you're saying. You're using too many acronyms. Really not sure where you're going with this. It's good to have that civilian perspective. So certainly don't rule out having people who haven't served as a mentor, because oftentimes they can actually provide more useful advice, because it's very likely that civilian hiring managers are going to be people you're interacting with, and you want to know what that civilian perspective is on your resume and your interview skills. What is a mentor? Kind of segues, of course, from who's a mentor, but, mentors can be coaches, mentors can be advisors, mentors provide confidence and encouragement. That's a really, really big one in our program. Mentors help you figure out what you want to do next, and they can be sounding boards. In terms of the when of mentorship, ideally it's something constant, it's something ongoing. You're kind of always on this journey of lifelong learning, and hopefully you're seeking out mentors at various points in your life. Maybe it's when you're trying to negotiate salary, or it's when you're about to, sign a lease because you're an entrepreneur and you want to open your first store, or maybe it's when you're feeling stuck at your job and you need somebody to talk to figure out if you should leave or if you should suck it up and try to make the best of the situation, because maybe there's perks like you can work remotely and you have a lot of vacation days. So there's always going to be different junctures in your life when you're going to need a mentor. So it's good to kind of have some people lined up that you can go to before the problems occur, right? You don't want to be that person that's only calling people when you need them. So ideally, these people are folks that you've built a relationship with already. So that way, you're not kind of only calling them when you have a problem and you need advice. One of the, also kind of on the when topic is, there could be a formal cadence, let's say, to the mentorship. Maybe you speak monthly. That's typically what we recommend if you're part of the ACP mentorship program. But lots of people, my husband still actually, he has a lot of mentors from when he made his transition out about 11 years ago. And he's got people that, maybe he just texts them twice a year to kind of, to my earlier point, like keep in touch with them and not allow too much time to pass. But then, you can also just ask them a quick question and get some quick advice. So it doesn't necessarily have to be this big burdensome thing, because everybody's busy. People have lives outside of work. So ideally mentorship is something that kind of fits in easily, but doesn't take up your life. So then to kind of move on a little bit to the where of mentorship, I guess, is, maybe a little bit different in a COVID environment, where most stuff is virtual, but that's actually a great thing, I think. Because really before, I'm just thinking back to the earlier days of ACP, when we were pairing people up, we only thought about mentorship being in person. It never even occurred to us, frankly, to think about, pairing a mentor in LA with a veteran in New York. We kind of just figured, if they can't meet in person, like it's just not going to go as well. But COVID, of course, flipped that completely on its head, and everybody not only knows how to use Zoom, but they're probably on Zoom 6-7 hours a day sometimes. So that's been a huge advantage toward our mentorship program. But I think just in terms of mentoring in general, because now you don't have to just be limited to phone calls and emails. To be able to have the face-to-face interaction, I think, is really key to developing a relationship too. So that way it's not just a transactional mentoring relationship. It's like ideally something where you feel something of a personal connection to the individual you're working with as well. And I think that is so much more enhanced by the ability to have video conferencing capabilities. So I think the where of mentorship probably for most people these days is on Zoom, or on AirMeet if we're logged into this session today. And the why is a huge thing. Why have a mentor? That's really the whole point of this presentation. And there's just so many reasons, honestly. It's all about, continually improving yourself. It's about giving yourself a competitive advantage. I was actually reading a statistic that was saying that only 3 out of every 10 people have a mentor, but that's a pretty low number considering that of the people that have them, 97% think that they're valuable. So there's definitely a disconnect. So the people that have mentors love them, but not enough people have them. So if you do have one, or hopefully after this presentation, if you get a mentor, you'll be, kind of setting yourself apart from 70% of the rest of the population. It's also just great, I think, to have kind of a personal board of directors, if you will, just kind of a team of people that you can reach out to get advice and have help from. And that kind of goes back to the earlier point of, there's no need to only have one mentor. You should definitely feel free to kind of take stock of the landscape and figure out your strengths and weaknesses and try to attract some people to want to hopefully give you advice in areas maybe that you're a little bit weaker in. So I think that that's, really important here. So just given the audience of today, the fact that we're really talking about veteran employment and transition, as well as spouse employment and career development, I think I wanted to just highlight a few things here. You can see on this next slide, we talk about this a lot at ACP, and this really relates to the why of mentorship and kind of where the value is. So this is some statistics from the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, and they're from 2016, but I do think that they're still relevant. So you can see on that top bar chart that in terms of, what is making transition challenging for veterans, 86% of veterans really are struggling to figure out what their career path should be. So, I use my husband as an example all the time. When he was getting out of the Army, he would type in his MOS into the MOS translator, and he was a field artillery officer. So he would type in 13 Alpha into the translator, and basically it told him that he was well suited to be a security guard, which is fine if that's what he wanted to do, but he was actually looking to get into either consulting or finance. And so it's kind of like, how do you navigate this if you're not really sure what job opportunities are out there? You're not really sure what companies are veteran friendly. You don't really know how to translate what you did in the military into, a corporate office job. That was something my husband really struggled with, is how do you discuss the fact that you were working with cannons and rockets in an interview at Morgan Stanley, where they want you to, be working on a trading floor in an office every day? How do you get them over that hurdle and convince them that maybe you don't have any experience, but you're a quick learner, you've led people in combat, and so you're willing to do whatever it takes to be successful? So that's a challenge. So why not have somebody from the private sector there to kind of talk through some of these issues with you and figure out a game plan? The second transition challenge, I think, is equally as important, just not getting any feedback at all from hiring managers. So, it's not very likely, I would think, that if you've sent out resumes into like the proverbial black hole, you're probably not getting very many of those recruiters to call you and give you the feedback of why they didn't contact you back. They're just not going to contact you back. So if you need feedback, who are you going to go to? And so that's really, to me, where the mentoring comes in. And similarly, 84% are reporting a pretty big challenge in terms of networking with different employers. Maybe their entire network is their friends that they served with in the military, but that's probably not going to be super helpful when you're trying to apply for different jobs outside the military. So how do you go about building that network? And that's really where I think mentorship can come in too. I think that mentorship and networking are very, very closely related, especially in the sense that your mentor is going to open doors for you. So it's not just that you're getting advice from your mentor, but it's also, who does your mentor know? So maybe your mentor is not exactly in the career field that you're interested in, but you can then ask your mentor to set up different meetings for you with people that they know that could be able to provide you useful advice so that you can learn about different opportunities and different roles in other industries. So mentorship is really a great way, I think, to kind of combat all of these transition challenges that are being reported. And on the spouse side, there's certainly career challenges as well. And that's something that I experienced just during the time that my husband was on active duty. My career path was completely all over the place, going from publishing to teaching to working at a law firm, to then trying to go into nonprofit. So it was all over the place. There were pretty big gaps in my resume. There were times where I was extremely underemployed, with a master's degree, making $7 an hour working, answering phones somewhere. So how do you take that information and then convince somebody, that you're going to be well suited for a managerial position when your past job was kind of, something that wasn't really in line with your career path. So I think for spouses, the challenges are different, but the challenges can also be solved by having a great mentor. I was actually on a panel this morning with 2 military spouses, and I asked them, if you were going to give advice to a fellow military spouse, what would be your biggest piece of advice about how they can improve their career? And both of those spouses mentioned getting a mentor. Just because, it's almost like a no-brainer. Why not get a leg up if it's something, that's available to you? So let's go on to our next slide here. So we talked about a little bit of this, but of course you don't know what you don't know. So mentorship is a great opportunity to kind of get clear on what it is that you don't know and then try to get up to speed quickly. Of course there's going to be blind spots, just the language and the culture of corporate America, just the different hierarchy of how decisions are made and the chain of command is completely different from, what you may have experienced in the military. So why not have kind of an insider's perspective on that? And that's something that I think mentors can really help with, especially if they're already, let's say, working at a company that you're interested in. Better to kind of know what the day-to-day is like before you start working there and then realize maybe it's not a good fit. So I always advise that people get a mentor to kind of learn about the corporate culture of different companies that they may be interested in working in. We talked about the personal board of directors thing, but, I really can't emphasize enough just that you should really have more than one mentor because each person is going to bring something different to the table. And then the other benefit too is that if you only have one mentor, they're potentially going to get overwhelmed if you have, let's say, a lot of requests for help, if you're got like competing job offers, and it's good to get multiple perspectives. I always advocate for that, just getting different people's perspectives. That way, you're not going to take everybody's perspective equally. Maybe one person says something that resonates with you more, or there's some reason to weigh their advice more heavily than somebody else's. So you can't go wrong by having as many perspectives as possible. Tough love. I think that's an important one too. You definitely need somebody to tell you what you don't want to hear. Maybe it's that you talk too much in military lingo. Maybe you're terrible at talking about yourself. That's something that I struggle with. That's also something my husband struggled with when he was interviewing after the Army was, everything they would ask him, his response would be, oh, well, the team did this, or we did this. He didn't like to start his sentences with, I did this. But if you're trying to sell yourself in an interview, that's not ideal. So it wasn't until he had a mentor that his mentor helped him realize that, he really needed to sharpen his stories in the interview process and be a little bit more comfortable with figuring out what his specific role was in a team situation so that he could, you don't want to brag, but that's really kind of what you need to do in a job interview because it is in that moment all about you. So those are some of the types of things that mentors can really be helpful with. Maybe you talk too fast or maybe you talk too slow, but those are things that mentors can help you realize about yourself. Somebody I know told me that their mentor forced them to videotape themselves giving a presentation and then watch it back. And while that does sound extremely painful and like I would probably not want to watch myself giving this presentation again tomorrow, I think it is important because that way if there's a particular speech pattern that you want to change about yourself, or there's, if you say a lot, that's just good to know as you're trying to get better. Somebody asked a question, how do you handle conflicting views from your mentor? I think it just goes back to what I said earlier of just not everybody's advice should be weighed equally, I don't think. Maybe one of the mentors you've known for 10 years and the other one you've known for 6 months. So maybe you take the advice of the person you've known longer. So I think there's got to be some context applied to the situation. So that one's a little tricky to answer just because we don't know what the issue is or what the advice is. But I think, when I'm faced with that type of challenge, I just try to figure out whose advice should I weigh maybe more heavily in that particular situation. But definitely a good question for sure. And then, as we saw in the previous slide, it's really hard to figure out what you want to do when you grow up. So why not have a mentor to kind of help you figure that out? Most veterans are not sure what they want to do after the military, and that's really where a mentor can come in and just plug that into the equation and help you figure out, especially if you're in an MOS that's tough to translate. Some are easier than others, but I think I like to say to people, so I was an English major in college, and when I graduated, I had no idea what I wanted to do in terms of my career. And everybody said, well, you're an English major, you should just be a teacher, as if, every English major is the same exact person with the same strengths and weaknesses and the same soft skills. And that's, I almost think of that like an MOS. Of course, it's very different, but my husband and I joke around about that. Like, not every 13 alpha has the same skill set. Some are going to be more introverted, some are extroverted, some are going to be good at sales, some are not, some are good writers, some are not, some want to go into a mechanical field, some might want to go back to school and go into healthcare. So in my personal opinion, I really think too much emphasis is placed on the MOS, and people need to really be having those conversations with mentors to figure out what their soft skills are as well, because that's really more what's, I think, going to be applicable in the corporate setting. So let's go here to the next slide. So I like this slide, misconceptions of mentorships. And these are all things that just from my work at ACP for almost 12 years, some of this is learned just from what I think people, when they signed up for the program, were expecting versus maybe reality. So I think some people expect that your mentor is going to tell you exactly what to do, but that is not the case. They're guides, they're coaches, but they're not going to lay it all out for you step by step. That's just not what you should be expecting from a mentoring relationship. You need to come to them with questions and thoughts and ask for feedback, but by no means are they going to be laying out a plan for you of, all right, if you do X, Y is going to happen, because there's no way that they could even possibly know that. I think sometimes too, people are expecting that their mentor is going to drive the dialogue. But your mentor is going to have their own career to manage, so they can't also manage yours at the same time. So you're really going to get out of a mentorship what you're willing to put into it. So if you're willing to invest the time and kind of be in the driver's seat of your own career, the likelihood is that you're going to get a lot more out of the relationship than just kind of waiting for your mentor to kind of like lecture you on exactly what to do. I think that's typically not the way that a mentorship would work. Mentors should not be expected to find jobs for you. I mean, what they can do is open doors, like we talked about before, help you figure out what industries could be a good fit, what roles and opportunities might be available. I think sometimes people might rule out an entire industry, like, oh, well, I could never work at Johnson & Johnson because I have no healthcare experience. Well, that might be true, but there's also so many other roles at a large company. Any large company is going to have plenty of other jobs beyond just the specialty of that company. So even if you don't have an IT background, you could still work at Cisco in human resources. So I think those are the types of things that mentors can be really helpful with, but typically the mentor's responsibility is not to place you in a job. They might know somebody at the company that they can network you with who could potentially, put in a good word for you or make another introduction to a recruiter. But to expect that your mentor is going to kind of like hand you a job on a silver platter, that would be amazing. And if that were the case, I think ACP would have maybe 100,000 alumni instead of 21,000. But I think it's important just to be clear up front that mentors are likely not going to just be finding jobs for vets or spouses. talked about this a little bit earlier, but I think there's sometimes a misconception that you can only have one mentor. In the ACP program, it's 1 year with one mentor, but plenty of people are also utilizing other services. I know Brian Arrington was speaking earlier, and we work with Vets to Industry all the time. They're a great partner of ours, and going to different events that Vets to Industry has and developing different connections and networking with people, I would advise that 100%. You want to talk to as many people as you can, so that way, to the earlier point, you have your personal board of directors ready to go. And then this, lastly, I think is also a misperception that a lot of people think that their mentor has to have served to be able to give them valuable advice. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think it's important to have the civilian perspective as well. So don't exclusively surround yourself by former military folks, just because I think you'd be missing out on some really good advice there. So, how to be a successful protege or mentee, if you'd prefer to call it that. So, you have to be receptive to feedback, and getting feedback is often kind of painful. People don't generally love getting feedback. When your boss is like, "Hey, can I talk to you for a second?" I mean, I know for me personally, it kind of gives me a slight panic attack. I don't love getting feedback. When I was a kid in school, if my teacher corrected me, I was one of those kids that would cry every time. So I totally get it. Feedback can be hard to take, but at the same time, it's really important, because how else are you going to grow, and how else are you going to get better? So I think you need to not only ask for feedback, but you also need to listen to it and be open to potentially changing your behaviors based on the feedback that you've received. Otherwise, you're kind of limiting your growth there. You definitely have to ask good questions. I mean, questions are kind of the key to everything. Trying to understand why things are the way they are, trying to understand people and what makes them tick. So you're going to get a lot more out of your mentorship if you are coming prepared with some good questions to ask. One of the biggest pieces of advice that I have is taking responsibility for the relationship. We talked about this earlier, but it's not your mentor's job to drive the conversation. So I always advise thinking about it almost like a 60-60 relationship. So, if you think about a marriage, you think like 50-50, okay? Both people will try to split the work. But if you do that, the likelihood is that something might fall through the cracks. So it's always a good idea to do a little bit more than you think you have to, because that way the likelihood of stuff falling through the cracks, I think, is a lot less. So even if you're thinking, all right, well, I called my mentor and he didn't return my call, that's not a reason to give up on the relationship. Maybe your mentor was busy, so give him another shot. Even if you don't think you need to, it's worth kind of going that extra mile just to kind of keep things in harmony. Definitely be patient. Success definitely doesn't happen overnight. So being patient is really important. Communication guidelines are also important, as well as getting your next meeting on the books. So I always advise people, especially if you're in our ACP mentoring program, when you're finishing your mentoring session, try to schedule your next one while you're still, finishing up that call or Zoom with the mentor. That way, it just avoids a situation where then, 5 weeks have passed and you guys haven't spoken. So it's always a good idea just to get the next meeting on the books. Even if you have to reschedule last minute, it's good to have something to look forward to, and then have, the time to prepare for that meeting. And also just thinking about not just short-term goals, but also long-term ones too. Where do you think you want to be in 3 to 5 years? And then is what you're doing in the short term aligned with that? And then if it's not, then that's going to be a really important topic to talk to your mentor about, is just thinking about where do you want to be in the future, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So this is just a quick slide I put together because I mentioned earlier that you want to be curious and you want to be asking questions to your mentor to try to get to know them and try to elicit some solid career advice. So we don't have to read through all of these, but these are just some questions that I think could lead to some very interesting discussion. How did you get to where you are today? this one I like, what qualities do you look for in the people you hire? So that way, if you're working with somebody who's mentoring you and they hire a lot of people, they're definitely going to know what not to do, but they're also going to know the qualities of the people that they do tend to hire. Most likely those people are, hardworking, they're timely, they're punctual, they're adaptable, they're go-getters, they're able to articulate their strengths and weaknesses. So it's good to have a feel for what that person is looking for when they hire, so that way you can keep those things in mind as you're interviewing as well. I always like to get book recommendations from people. I would definitely recommend asking your mentor what they're reading. And then this one is really important too, of just periodically asking your mentors and people in your network to introduce you to people in their network, because that's just going to expand your personal reach and just open doors for you for people that are part of your mentor's network that you haven't personally talked to before. So that's just going to be of benefit to you. My next slide. So this is kind of about paying it forward. So some of you might be in a position where maybe you don't feel like you need as much career advice, or maybe you've had some really great mentors along the way and you feel like you're in a position to mentor somebody, and that's great. And you can always start by doing that informally, maybe mentoring other veterans at your company or other military spouses at your company, like people who just joined, just to make sure that they kind of have a friendly face in the office and that they know that they can come to you for advice. So if you've already gone through the transition and are in a position where you feel like you can pay it forward, that's a really great thing to do. If you can open a door for somebody else, I think that is how, that's really how the world works. It's all about who you know. So, don't forget about that. If somebody's paved the way for you, then it's really only fair for you to think about, what could you be doing for others? Bullet 2, I think is important if you are mentoring somebody, that you're actively listening to them. So I'm sure we've all talked to people before where you can kind of get the sense that they're not really listening to you and they're just thinking about what they want to say next. So if you're mentoring somebody, I would say try to listen to understand them first and really get a feel for where they're coming from. And don't even worry about trying to immediately jump in and solve their problem for them. Just listen. Then that gives you a little bit of time to think and then give a more prepared response. Even if you don't know exactly what the answer is at that time, you can always have another conversation later. But listening is really important, as opposed to just feeling the need to solve every one of your mentees' problems for them immediately, which I think sometimes is a natural reaction. And then also mentorship is definitely a two-way street. That's one of the nicest things I think for me about working at ACP, the mentoring program, is just hearing from the mentors themselves of how much this program has changed them too, especially for the mentors that are part of ACP that haven't served in the military. It's really helped, I think, to bridge the military civilian divide and kind of just bridge that gap a little bit in terms of better understanding between the two groups and better appreciation, I think, from the civilian side of what the men and women who have served have gone through and how difficult it's been and the sacrifices that have been made. And, the really neat thing I think about, at least in ACP, is our mentors are certainly not looking at this as charity. They know that the vets in our program are not looking for charity. They're just looking for advice. And so this is a great way for mentors to the mentors in the program to pay it forward and say thank you to those who have served. Next slide here. So this is just some general advice that I have received from mentors over the years. So I figured I would share this just because some of it is pretty good, and it's just not things that I had ever thought of until somebody had said them to me. So the first one is having a strategy for every conversation. So mostly in the business world, but it probably could also apply in somebody's personal life too. But it's surprising to me in working now in the business world for 15 years, how many people just show up to meetings and they have no idea what's going to be discussed. They're not prepared at all, and they have no idea what they want to get out of the meeting. So taking that time to prepare and knowing what you want to achieve is extremely important. What is the outcome that you're looking for? So think about that. The second one is being proactive. You don't want to just wait for things to happen to you. You want to make them happen for you. So don't just sit back and be a passive recipient of your life. You really want to take charge, take the reins, and take ownership over being in the driver's seat. So what does that actually mean? So preparing for meetings, having a backup plan, thinking about what could go wrong, handling things in advance. So it takes a little bit of extra work, but that ensures that you are going to be in control over situations versus kind of like, oh, well, I was supposed to meet with this person, but then my train was late and so I had to cancel. It's like, well, if it's a really important meeting, maybe take one train earlier. So it sounds obvious, but I had never really thought about just what it means to be proactive in the workplace until it was kind of spelled out a little bit for me. The third one is super important. No one cares more about your career than you. So it's not your boss's job to manage your career, and it's not your mentor's job to manage your career. They already have to manage themselves and possibly their kids and other people. You need to think about your career, and you're the only person who's in the driver's seat for that. So you got to constantly be thinking about, where do you want to be in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, where are the gaps, what do you need to learn, and then who's going to teach you. So those are really, really important things to be constantly evaluating. I mean, I feel like the end of the year is always a good time to take stock of your career, thinking about, all right, it's kind of a natural time if you think about it, because you're probably getting a performance review. Maybe you wrote a self-review, and even if you're not required to review yourself, I would always recommend doing that, just to kind of think about, even if it's November, you might have forgotten about a really big accomplishment from February. So it's good to kind of have that in writing for yourself, and then compare it to last year's self-review. Where did you think you wanted to be at this time in a year, and have you made that happen? So it's just good to kind of be mindful of your progress over time. Somebody once asked me what the most important word is in the English language, and I had no idea. And they said that the most important word is why. And I definitely can agree with that, because it's always important to kind of be questioning why things are the way they are. Why do we do it this way? The bad answer is, well, we've always done it this way. So I think just constantly asking yourself why in a work setting is just really important, because it could lead to discoveries about, maybe there's multiple people working on the same project, or there's a better way to do things, or whatever the case may be. I think you just don't want to be complacent. You want to be kind of constantly just pushing yourself to be asking yourself why. The third to last one I like to is just finding a way to become indispensable in the workplace. You need to care about not just the big stuff, but also the small stuff. And for me personally, like, one way that I was able to advance in my career was kind of doing things that no one else wanted to do, because somebody has to do them. And so that was a way that I was able to try to make myself indispensable, was just taking on maybe tasks that other people thought were mundane, or maybe boring, or not like in line with their personal interests at the time. I just tried to look at everything as a learning opportunity. So I would just encourage you to do that, and try to just be thinking about, yes, it's important to do exactly what's in your job description, but you should also try to be doing a little bit more, because that also leads to personal growth for you, just learning new skills and taking advantage of new opportunities. Feedback is a gift. That one's kind of obvious, but we talked about it before. Even though it's painful to get feedback, if somebody does give you feedback, even if you don't agree with it, the best thing to do is just say, thank you so much for that feedback. I'm really going to take that into consideration, instead of disagreeing with the feedback, arguing, or becoming defensive. Just, even if it's something that's tough to swallow, just kind of take it in and thank the person for sharing that feedback with you. And then lastly, this was somewhat surprising to me, but now that I think about it, it makes perfect sense, that you're always selling no matter what you're doing. And I wouldn't think that me personally, I would never think of myself as being in a sales role, but pretty much any job you're going to have, you're going to be selling. Even if you're not, a car salesman, but you're going to be making presentations, having to persuade employees to improve their performance, or convincing people in an interview that they should hire you. And so everything matters in terms of making a sale. If I was wearing a hoodie and like my presentation had thousands of typos in it, I don't know that people would take me as seriously. And so there's a lot of intangible aspects to making a sale as well. So it's everything from not just what you say, but also the various aspects of your appearance, your tone, your style, your materials. So don't take that stuff for granted, because it's all kind of part of the overall package. So I just thought that it might be helpful to kind of just share some of these little tidbits that I've learned along the way that I wouldn't have thought of if it was not for some of the mentors that I've had. So let's see here. Yeah, so Douglas agrees. Even in most job roles, you're selling. So even if you're not in a specific sales role, you're definitely going to be selling in some capacity, whether it's, even if you're in the nonprofit sector, you're probably fundraising, you're trying to get partnerships, you're trying to get more applications from the constituents that you're trying to serve. So I think selling is just an important skill that even if you don't think of yourself as a salesperson, you are selling no matter what you're doing. So I'll briefly just talk a little bit about ACP, just because hopefully by now you have heard about the value of mentorship and you're thinking about getting your own mentor. So of course there's other ways you can acquire mentors, but since I do work at ACP, I think it's important for me to just tell you briefly the types of mentors that we have available, because I think these could be helpful to you. So you'll see here about 100 different corporate logos. So all of these companies are partners of ACP, and so their employees have volunteered in our program to serve as mentors to transitioning military as well as active duty spouses. So there's some really amazing people behind the corporate logos. Each one of these companies provides about 50 mentors into our program. So when somebody applies to ACP, so this is a little bit just about if you are interested in trying to get a mentor for yourself, I would highly suggest coming to our ACP website, which is just acp-usa.org. Once you sign up, somebody from my team will reach out to you. They'll set up an introductory phone call. We'll kind of learn a little bit more about your background. If there's areas of the transition that you're struggling with, we'll get a good feel for that. And then if there's specific companies on that list that are attractive to you, you have the chance to let us know. And, we can see about pairing you up with somebody who works at one of those companies so you can get some insight. Typically, it takes about 4 to 6 weeks for us to pair people up. So it's a pretty quick process. And I think it's an easy way just to get a leg up on the transition and start just getting some advice about what your next steps might be after the military. And then just to kind of wrap up a little bit, I always like to leave people with some next steps or just some things that you might want to consider jotting down. So hopefully you'll find a mentor. If you don't use ACP, there's plenty of other ways you can get mentors. I mentioned Vets to Industry before, but they have lots of networking mixers and different ways that you can meet individuals who are very veteran friendly and military spouse friendly. So that's a great way to kind of be, part of a family of people who's kind of looking to help you out. So definitely check ACP and V2I out. There's also, of course, the informal channels. So maybe you already work at a company that has a veterans group. So try to seek people out. You don't necessarily have to go up to somebody and say, hey, would you be my mentor? That could be a little bit awkward, but just get the conversation started. And then over time, you'll kind of see what develops. And even if it's just 1 or 2 conversations, that still counts. But it might wind up developing into, a relationship that lasts for years. So you kind of don't really know until you get started of, the depth of the relationship and the length of it. So definitely be open to formal mentorship, informal relationships with people. It's also very easy on a site like LinkedIn to reach out to people. But you'll also see in my fourth bullet point, I have so many people who send me LinkedIn messages that just say, hey, I saw your profile. Can we hop on a call so I can pick your brain? So you'll see that my sub bullet there says no brain picking. Try to find a reason why you're connecting with the person and why they should talk to you. Not that most people want to help. I don't think you're going to find that many people who are just not open to a conversation or don't want to help, but people are busy. And if you just say to somebody, hey, can I pick your brain, it kind of puts the onus on them to think about what to talk about. Whereas if you reach out to somebody in a message and say, hi, I'm so and so. I served in the Army for 5 years. I'm about to make the transition. I've been reading your LinkedIn profile, and the role you're in right now sounds like exactly what I'm hoping to do after the military. Is there any way we could jump on a quick call for 15 minutes so you could tell me about a typical day at your company and maybe talk a little bit about how you got your foot in the door? I honestly think that you're going to have a lot more success with people wanting to help you by just being a little bit more specific about what you're looking for, because that just makes it so much easier for somebody to help you. So I'm not saying that no one will respond if you ask to pick their brain, but I just don't know that you're going to get that many takers. So I also always love to recommend to people that they take the 16 personalities quiz. It's just really important to be self-aware, to kind of know what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. So it's super easy to just jump on to 16personalities.com. It takes maybe 20 minutes to answer some questions about, things you like, things you don't like, how you tend to act in various situations. And that's going to give you really good insight into your personality type. And then it'll spit out a little report for you of how that personality type typically acts in the workplace, career fields that could be good for you, how you act in friendships. So it's a lot of information, not specifically just to, professional workplace situations, but I just think it's important, like I said, to be self-aware, but then also it could be something to discuss with your mentor too. And to just be aware of maybe how, let's say, your weaknesses in the workplace could be strengthened, or just it kind of helps too with the dynamic of you with other coworkers. If you have coworkers who are maybe the exact opposite personality, to kind of be aware of that and how maybe you can adjust your style a little bit to just avoid conflict. So I always love to recommend that personality quiz just because it's pretty interesting. And then lastly, there's thousands of books about mentorship, career advice, leadership, but these are just kind of a few that I personally like that I think could be relevant to our community here. So I'm sure you've heard the Admiral McRaven commencement speech about how important it is to make your bed every day because it sets the tone for the day. If you have not watched the commencement speech that he gave, I would highly recommend just hopping on YouTube and looking that up, because it's just a great speech. The delivery is awesome, and it has a lot of just good nuggets of information. One book I really love is called Great on the Job. Happens to be written by an ACP mentor, Jody Glickman, but it gives really solid career advice. It's not specific to veterans or military spouses. It's just general career advice that's good for anybody. But it's one of the best books I've ever seen, just in terms of being specific about like actual things you could say to your boss if a problem happens, or actual things you can say if you have a project due in a week and you don't think you're going to make the deadline. So sometimes I feel like career advice is too vague, but this book is really good at being specific about just how to get better at your job. How to Lead by David Rubenstein, just about different CEOs and leaders who have their styles are vastly different, but they've all been successful, and it kind of gives you a lens into their personality and what made them successful. And then some of you may have heard of the Beyond the Uniform podcast. Justin Nassiri actually went through the ACP program. He's a great guy, and he's got tons of episodes on this podcast just talking about different people who've made the transition to corporate America from the military, how they did it, different morsels of information that they want to pass on to people. So I think you might find that helpful. And that's really it. Thanks for bearing with me for 54 minutes here. So I think I answered the 2 questions that came in, but have a couple of minutes here in case somebody does have another question that they want to ask. And then, yeah, I know we're going to be wrapping up shortly, but I'll be around in the networking lounge tomorrow if people have any more questions. Okay, so somebody had another question. Does ACP have mentors that can be of assistance for public sector positions? Yes, so in addition to the different corporations with the logos that you saw, we've also expanded the program to really try to find people that maybe work in the federal government or more in the public sector, or entrepreneurs too. So don't worry, even if you are not interested in corporate America at all, chances are we'll be able to find a really good mentor for you. So it may just take us an extra week or two, but we have a very strong network. So we're very good at finding pretty niche mentors. Somebody once wanted a mentor who specialized in kidnapping insurance, and lo and behold, we were able to find somebody. So I'm pretty confident that we can, kind of find somebody for just about anybody's interests. Okay, well, let's see here. I don't know that there's any other questions coming in. So, Jordana, did you want to come in here and wrap things up?
Hey there. Thank you so much, Colleen. That was fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
It looks like you may have gotten, there's a connection in there. So not really a question, but thank you so much. I know that it's late and you are on the East Coast with me. So you're spending your early evening with us. So I really, really appreciate it on behalf of everybody here.
Sure.
Will you be around tomorrow for networking and connections? If anyone here wants to connect with Colleen, definitely keep an eye out. That people tab up above will show you who all is here. You can send direct messages, connect with her on LinkedIn, and any other way to get involved with ACP. And do not leave the event before you check out the booth in the expo that has a little bit more information and just some different resources that you can grab there as well. So anything left you want to add before you leave, Colleen?
No, just thank you so much for having me. I know it's been a great day for all of us who participated. So thanks, and we're looking forward to tomorrow.